Mark Hamlin. I'll be going through the presentation this morning. Don't need to know much about me. If you want to talk after this, you can come up and chat, or we can go talk downstairs in the expo area. More importantly, we'll talk about what the session is about. So today, to make sure you're in the right session, we're going to really start with some of the basics, what the inventory structure looks like in NAV. So this is sort of beginner to intermediate type stuff. What the inventory structure is like, what we mean by inventory supply planning and bin replenishment or warehouse supply planning. So sometimes these abstracts are a little unclear about what you're actually going to learn, but we're going to sort of talk a little bit about both of these at a high level, and then we're going to do a little bit on the inventory count side of it as well. Now, let's find out a little bit about you. So first of all, how many people are from Mountain or Pacific time zone? Only if that sucks. It's like 4 in the morning, right? Yeah, some of you look like how I feel, which is great, by the way. I didn't mean to imply you look like crap. You look very good. All right, so how many people are running production facilities with the warehouse today? Okay, good. And old NAV, so how many are on like the Windows client and all that kind of stuff? Probably most of you. Who's on Business Central? Anybody on Business Central right now? And out of that, are you on cloud or on premises cloud? Okay, good. All right. By the way, I'll probably do most of the demos in the old Windows client, but if you prefer, I can switch to the new modern client, to the new stuff, if you like. And anybody here new to BC, or Business Central or NAV? Probably the people on the cloud, right? So, okay, good. And anybody running advanced warehousing in here? A few people? Okay, so you're probably well aware of some of the things we're going to go through. And multiple warehouses? Okay, good. And who's in charge of inventory management here? Okay, I just want to know where I'm going with this. All right, so let's start with the basics. We'll start with inventory structure. Beautiful graphics that I did myself. You wouldn't believe it. All right, so we'll start out with how NAV is structured. And you probably already know some of this, but just to get everybody on the same page. We start out with the company, of course. So you've got your company. Within the company, you can have 0 or more locations. If you don't have a location set up, you should probably set one up. It's a lot easier to move forward if you have at least one location set up, and you set up the location mandatory, so you're always forced to use a location on transactions. So within a company, you have 0 or more locations. Typically, you have one location, at least. Within that location, you can have something called zones. Okay, and this is only applicable if you have the directed pick or the advanced warehousing turned on. So zone subdivides your location, your warehouse, into different zones, like maybe the freezer and dry goods or allergen-specific type zones, that sort of thing. And then within the zone, you can have a bin. Now again, if you don't have the directed pick turned on, then you just have a location followed by bins. So that's all fairly straightforward. We have location, we might have zones, but then we have bins. Now, the way that works is we combine that with the item master. So within a location, we have items, so we have our item master. And on the first one, if we just have location, item master, plus a variant, we'll get a stock keeping unit. So what that means is you can have essentially, who knows what a stock keeping unit is, by the way? How many people use it? A few. So stock keeping unit, for those of you who don't know, it's like a mini item master. And it's location specific planning information is mostly what it does. There's a few other things it does, but it's mostly location specific planning information and location information. So if you don't use bins, you can use a stock keeping unit to keep track of where an item is in different locations. Okay? If we go with bins, the bins plus the item master gives us something called bin content table, right? So bin content record. So if I'm in a location that has no bins turned on, right? If I don't turn any of this stuff on, and I have multiple locations, I can use a stock keeping unit to keep track of those items per location. Where they are, how many I have in stock at that location, how many are being transferred, those sorts of things. If I turn on bins, whether I have zones or not, if I turn on bins, then I can find everything by bin content. So by location and bin, I can find out everything about that item. Okay, make sense? Yeah, pretty straightforward. By the way, if you have any questions at any point, stick your hand up. Yes?
You can't have bins without the zones turned on?
Yes, you can. Yeah. Yeah, as I mentioned here, you only get zones if you turn on directed pick. And directed pick is the advanced warehousing. Well, it's actually directed put away and pick. But anyway, The directed put away and pick is advanced warehousing, and by turning that on you get zones, but you also get a bunch of other stuff that you may or may not want. All right, so let's talk about bins versus the Skews, which is stock keeping units. So Skews is, you know, if you're in retail it's a bad term, but stock keeping unit. So some people don't want to turn on bins, and there's lots of reasons for that. You may not want that level of control. Because when you turn on bins, every time you do a transaction, you need to indicate which bin that transaction is happening from, and that might be overkill. So in place of that, you can use a stock keeping unit as a bin, almost a pseudo bin, because you can have a shelf number on the stock keeping unit that tells you where that item is located. All right? So both SKUs and bin content indicate where that item is stored in the location. Okay? They're location specific, and they can have min, max, and other planning parameters. Okay? So on this one, anybody know what, or who uses the shelf number? That's a better question. A few people. So the shelf number is just informational. So if you're using stock keeping units instead of bins, it's not forcing you to indicate a bin when you do a transaction. It's not telling you exactly where that item is in the warehouse. It's giving you some information about where it might be. Okay, so that's one of the downsides of using SKUs. When I say you can have min-max on a bin, that min-max isn't for that external supply chain planning, right? That min-max on a bin has nothing to do with purchasing or anything else. It's all internal warehouse management side of things. So some people do that. They're like, oh, I can set a min-max on this bin and it'll tell me to order when I get below a certain amount. No. So the bins, the min-max and everything on the bin is internal only. And this is what I just mentioned. The stock keeping units, they don't control inventory by that location, by the shelf number on the cart. So any questions about that? The difference between indicating where something is using a shelf number versus a bin? Yes, sir.
We have multiple manufacturing locations. We use SKUs religiously, but there's a question. One location has inventory at manufacturing location, so I had point of use inventory, but then there's a raw warehouse. My Mexico location almost has religiously a raw warehouse, but we didn't set it up as zones, okay? But the idea about setting up a zone and having that held or tracked by shelf or by bin, that location, if you're doing that, we still want to have the SKU in the bin?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is that possible?
Yeah, so the question is, can you have a SKU and a bin simultaneously? You can. There's nothing preventing you from doing that. So the bin is, you know, when we say it's used as a pseudo bin, that's really for warehouse control. But what I mentioned in the previous slide is that a stock keeping unit is more for supply chain planning, or more for external planning. So you can have a stock keeping unit that indicates your min-max for purchasing or any of the planning parameters, those sorts of things that you need. I say min-max, but I don't really like min-max, lot for lot, or whatever you're using. So the stock keeping unit controls that purchasing planning or the replenishment planning, and the bins control what's happening internally in the warehouse. Okay, so you can use those simultaneously or sort of independently if you prefer. All right, any other questions? Good. All right. Now, I've mentioned you know, stuff about directed put away and pick and a few other things. There is another session tomorrow that goes through that in more detail. If you're interested in the different configuration options for the warehouse, we won't touch on that too much. We will talk a little bit about it as we go through this session, but if you want to get more ideas about how to set up the warehouse, there's that session tomorrow, and it's not at 8 a.m., so that's a bonus. All right.
8 a.m., your slide says 1.
Yeah, 1 o'clock, 1:50. It's not at 8.
I thought you just said 8 a.m.
Not at 8 a.m. See, this is why 8 a.m. is bad, because, you know, you're like, nobody understands what I'm saying, even me. Anyway. All right, let's now let's have a look at how that works. So let's see if I can actually do this properly on my side. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go in and just look at a couple of things here. First of all, this is always fun, and it's translated into the new client as well. When you want to do bin contents, let me just keep typing. There are a bunch of different bin contents pages, and there's 3 different bin contents pages in the system. There's one you get from the item card. There's 2 different ones you get from this menu here as well. So if you're looking for it and you don't see kind of the stuff I'm showing, you'll understand why. So here's one of the versions, bin content. So it tells you my location, my bin, my item number, and a bunch of other stuff. That's one version of the bin contents, but it's the more useless one. The better ones are, sorry, my keys aren't working here, is this one. And this one, same thing, you know, there's location filter, but by the way, if you're naming bins, it's always nice. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. So here's my bin, my item, and all that kind of stuff. And the important thing on this one is it gives you a lot more information. So it gives you your min max quantities here. And it also gives you what's available to actually pick and a few other things as well in there. Okay, so that's a better bin content screen. And this again tells you the difference between a stock keeping unit and a bin. This tells me exactly for each item, like if I look at this LS75 here, that tells me exactly how many I have in each bin location within the warehouse. If I use a shelf number, I don't get that. It tells me I have 50 in stock and shelf number A3, but that could be spread out throughout the warehouse. I don't know. Bins give me exactly where they need to go. And that min-max we'll come back to in a bit, where you can see I've got a min and a max quantity on this particular bin, and this particular one is under the min quantity. So what will end up happening is we want to pull it back up to the max quantity, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, so that's the bin contents. The other one is the stock keeping units. And you can get there from the item card as well. Or there's a stock keeping unit list you can use. And the nice thing about the stock keeping unit is based on the location that you've got set here. I don't know why it's not showing my cursor on this thing. That's annoying. Let's just see if we can get that set up. We'll just do this. All right, so this location code, so the quantity on hand and all the other fields on that stock keeping unit, if we open one up, are filtered already to that location code. So all the quantities, all the supply and demand quantities are all filtered to that blue location and the variant code as well. So when we're using it in the warehouse, that's the shelf number here. That shelf number is the indicator of where that might be stored in the warehouse, right? And it's not a controlled thing. It's really just informational. And then the other important thing that we'll get to later is, you know, all the planning parameters. And we actually have a session on the website, a recorded one. This is location specific as well. So when you're doing planning, you can plan different min-maxes or different planning parameters per location. Okay. Any questions about any of that at all? Okay. Oh, yes.
Bin contents, have you ever been able to see lot numbers besides using a back box?
Yeah. The only way you can see lot numbers in bin contents is with the fact box. So when did they release that? 2013 or something, where that's it. They've got that little fact box. They don't have the same thing for serial numbers for some reason, but that's the only, base nav, that's the only way you can see it.
We I've ran into the same problem. We have just a quick customization. We call it extended bin content.
Okay.
It goes off the container ID information close to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We use bin by lots, right? So they have one for lots.
For which, sorry?
Bins by lots.
Bins by lots.
I believe it's customized. Because I use it also.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there, you can also go to the bin contents page and you can set a lot filter and it'll tell you which bins have that particular lot is the other way, but it's kind of weak. Yeah, and there's reports and things like that you can use, but a lot of people do customize that where they're going to build a page that gives them that detail. Okay. All right, good. All right, so let's talk about inventory supply planning. Now this is bringing stuff into the warehouse from external suppliers or production or whatever it happens to be. And there's a few different ways we can do that. So does anybody use the purchase advice report? No. No. Reports suck. Yes, sir. Sorry, you had a question?
No.
Oh, okay.
I think we do.
Yeah, so Some people, well, we've done modifications where that'll be modified to actually populate the requisition worksheet because there are advantages to the purchase advice report. It's not noisy like these two guys. So the other one is the requisition worksheet and planning worksheet. Anybody know the difference between those two? Requisition worksheet is sort of intended to be used for purchasing only, right? It won't do any of the manufacturing or anything like that. It's exactly the same logic. They've just kind of restricted it, and I think that's from old licensing requirements. So don't use that. Use the planning worksheet instead. It does the same thing, but the planning worksheet does a lot more that makes it handy. Like, for example, the requisition worksheet, if it runs into an error, just stops, and you have to fix it and start over. Planning worksheet will just keep running and tell you all the errors it found, as an example. Now, the worksheets, they're date phased. The purchase advice report, the reason I mentioned that one is, like I said, it's less noisy. So it's not going to really consider dates. Like if I'm ordering something today that was supposed to be here, you know, tomorrow or whatever, it might tell me to cancel a previous purchase order because it was ordered a day late or a day early or whatever it happens to be. So the purchase advice report doesn't look at the dates really so much. It's just going to sum up what you need versus what you have and tell you what you should order, whereas the worksheets are all date phased, which makes them very noisy. And what I mean by that is exactly that. If you've got a discrepancy on dates, it's going to tell you to cancel purchase orders or cancel production orders, create new ones, reschedule, all that kind of stuff, and gets very noisy. But they're really the only tool that we have available to use. Now, that distribution planning, you know, most people think of the planning worksheet as MRP, but it also does, you know, DRP, distribution requirements planning. And what that means is it'll also look at transfers between locations as well, which you probably know if you're using it, right? So if you've got the stock keeping units set up, another use for those is it'll tell you how you replenish your stock. So if I go in and I say, you know what, for this particular item at my Mexico location, I don't buy it, I transfer it in from some other warehouse, the planning worksheet will do that. It'll look at where I'm supposed to retrieve this from and it'll create a transfer order to pull that in from that other warehouse. Okay. Yes, sir.
But that's driven from your SKU page, but you only get one option.
That's right.
So you can't purchase and, you know, and transfer it, you know. So it'd be ideal is if you could say, well, site one has excess inventory, transfer first, then purchase.
Exactly, yeah. So the comment or the question, well, it's more of a comment, but is that, you know, it's very difficult to switch that. If you say, hey, to replenish this product in warehouse A, I transfer it from warehouse B, but today I want to buy it instead because warehouse B is out of stock. You know, you don't have that choice easily in the configuration. What you have to do in the planning worksheet is you can change that. You can change the replenishment system, like where you're actually getting it from, and you can change it to purchase. Does anybody do that on a regular basis?
How do you do that?
Oh,
Because,
I'll show you in a sec.
all right,
Yeah.
because normally when you do the purchasing side, if the SKU was incorrectly created and it was not a vendor identified on that, you can't purchase from. I can't.
I'll show you. Maybe it's something in your system, but yes, you can switch. So if you've got a set of transfer and you want to buy it, you can switch it on the planning worksheet and change it. Now, any idea what will happen if you do that? Well, we'll cut a purchase order instead of a transfer order, but guess what? Next time you run that planning worksheet, it's going to know, why the heck are you buying this? You're supposed to be transferring. It's going to tell you to cancel the PO and transfer it back in, right? So it's a little annoying, but it's a lot annoying, actually. But you can do it, right? And then it's up to the planners to recognize that, hey, I actually do have enough stock and I don't need to cancel and rebuy or retransfer. All right, so let's actually have a look at that. So a couple of things that we'll mention is, first of all, on the stock keeping unit, that replenishment. So when we come in here, on the item card, if you've ever seen it, there's a replenishment system, and you have really three options. You have purchase, production, and assembly. And when you go to the stock keeping unit, you've got another one, which is transfer. And if you select transfer, what it allows you to do is specify a transfer sorry, my scrolling isn't working. The transfer from code, just to indicate where you're transferring it from. So that can be used in a lot of different places. You know, you've got a distribution center and you're transferring out to stores, or you've got a manufacturing location, you always want to transfer in from a raw material warehouse, or those sorts of things. So I'd use a different scenario with that. Okay, so that's where you set it up. And then what you do is we go in, and let's actually look at, first of all, the requisition worksheet. Let's do this, sorry. So the requisition worksheet, very plain Jane. You come in here, it's got calculate plan, and it's going to go in, and it's going to look at all the supply demand, and it's going to give us a plan. I'm not going to run it on this. If there's an error, like I said, it blows up. It doesn't do any of the manufacturing planning or assembly planning. You have to use the planning worksheet for that. So the other one, I won't do the purchase advice report, but it's worth looking at. I mean, you need a customization to use it appropriately, and that customization would be to automatically generate planning worksheet lines. But if you are doing purchase planning versus more MRP and you don't care about the date phasing, then the purchase advice report may be worth looking at. All right, let's have a look at the planning worksheet.
When you say that, can you not just go and run the planning worksheet and make the purchase advice order?
No, so when you, the trick is when you run the planning worksheet, the reason, depending on your environment, so if you're a distributor and you're just buying stuff and you've cut a PO, you're not going to go back and change it because it's part of a vendor prepaid amount or whatever. You don't want to get a cancel message, or with this transfer thing, you don't want to get a cancel message to cancel that PO, reschedule it or whatever. You don't care. You've cut the PO, it's coming in. You don't care. The planning worksheets are going to tell you to do things like that. Purchase advice won't. So depending on your environment, you may want to use that instead.
Okay, so that you mentioned there was a customization to run the purchase advice report.
Right, so if you're going to use if you like that style of planning more, the purchase advice report that doesn't date phase everything, then I would do a customization, take the results of that report and dump it onto the planning worksheet. Exactly, yep. All right, now there's a few options here. I don't know if we can actually run the plan. I can't see my mouse again. So, you know, I won't get into the details. It's sort of outside the scope of this, but really the one you typically run is the regenerative plan. There's also a net change plan. And it just gives you, I'm sure, how many people run this on like a daily basis? Lots of people, yeah. This, always have that set, of course. If you don't, always make sure you have that set. Otherwise it does stupid stuff. And we run that. Anyway, I'm not going to run it for a long period of time, but you get the general idea. It's going to come in, and it's going to calculate the plan, it's going to give us our fact boxes and everything else, and from here we can cut the POs. I am running a little bit just so we can go and have a look at if we want to change a suggestion. Okay. By the way, if I ran that in the requisition worksheet, I would have got an error here, I would have rerun it, then I would have got this error, then I would have rerun it, and so on and so forth. So don't use requisition worksheet, kind of sucks. All right, so here's all the messages. Most of these are new. Doesn't look like I have any cancel messages, but this is where you get the noise, right? You get any one of these potential messages coming up based on incorrect dates or anything like that. Now, to change the replenishment, if we scroll over here, we've got this set to transfer. Well, I actually don't have the replenishment system visible, so let's actually do that. If it's available, so let's do replenishment system. And there's another field on here that's not always visible, and that is supply from. And that's actually a good field to make visible on this worksheet, because supply from is set based on whether you're buying it from a vendor or whether you're transferring it in. And instead of having two fields to deal with, you've got just the one. You can set supply from, and it'll set everything else. So if I want to change this, here it's telling me to transfer it in from the blue location. If I want to change, oh, you know what? I forgot to make another field visible here. They should all be visible by default. The vendor number field. All right, so now that I've got that, if I decide I want to change this from a transfer to a purchase, I would just take, select the purchase. That blanks out the transfer from code, and then I can enter my vendor, and away I go. And that's it. So now this is going to purchase instead of transfer, and vice versa. If I wanted to transfer, I change this to transfer, set the transfer from code, and I'm done. Okay. Any questions about that at all?
If it's on purchase, can you change
Yeah. Now, that's a bit of a trick, right? Because if you go to change the vendor, it comes up with this, and it's blank. And the reason is, the way it does it, it's looking up to all the vendors that are associated with this item. If I haven't set those up, it doesn't show anything. So it's one extra step. I have to go in there and explicitly add that vendor in here, and then I can choose it from a list, or I can just come in here and type in the vendor number. Okay.
That list that
This one here?
We have a couple components that will have several vendors, and their prices for those components will be laid in the relative information.
Right.
The relative pricing information, but we only have one vendor listed on the SKU.
Right.
So where's this list coming from?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the question is really, there's one vendor. If you look at the stock keeping unit card for this, there's one vendor listed on the item card or stock keeping unit. Where does this come from? Well, if you go to the stock keeping unit or the item, that's actually the item card, and go into, there's a vendors button, it'll bring up this list. And this is where you can list all the alternate vendors for that item. So the vendor on the SKU or the item card is your default vendor. That's what's going to pop in. Every time I run the planning worksheet, that's what's going to pop in here. If I use the drop down, it's going to give me a list of all the alternate vendors I could potentially use. And from there, that's also where you get your pricing. So if you've gone in and set up your pricing, this is where that's coming from, right? Okay. All right. Any other questions about the planning worksheet at all? Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. No. So if you don't, that's a good question though. If you don't have a SKU set up and you run this, what it's going to do is it's going to use the item card for the details to run that plan. There's a few gotchas there. There's, if you're running manufacturing, there's also components location setting. But sorry, go ahead.
That's running SKU on my main site. Producing anything that I need on this site, but I have other people that just want to get replenish from that site. Can I manage SKU creation only on those locations?
Yes. Yeah. So the question, I think, was, can you have SKUs just for a single location? And the answer is yes. So again, if you don't have a stock keeping unit set up for a specific location, it's going to use the item card, unless you set components at location and you're running MRP. But yeah, you can have SKUs just for a specific location or specific items. You don't have to have a SKU for every single item, right? Okay. All right. Good. Any other questions on that guy at all? No? All right. All right, so that... No, sorry.
If I would set up a location, I'm not prepared with SKUs right now, just want to get my location set up. And then 3 months down the road, it's going to be SKUs to undo what I've already done, or can I just go ahead and build whatever?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the stock keeping unit is, it's not master data. It's sort of related information. I shouldn't use that term, but that's basically what it is. So if we go in and we look at the item card or the item list, either way, so I can come in and I can delete SKUs anytime I want. I can recreate them. So to create SKUs, you actually come in and you create the stock keeping unit. And when you do that, you can, oops. You can come in and you can replace previous SKUs. So what it does, when you run this report, create stock keeping unit, it's processing report, it's going to use all the details that you set up on the item card and create a new stock keeping unit from that. Either overwriting existing ones or just creating new ones that you haven't got already.
Just be careful. There should be, make sure you put a location in
Yeah.
that. Because if you don't, it's going to default and create an SKU for every single location you have.
Yeah. Which is not terrible, except, you know, so it could be a lot of data, right? If you've got 100,000 items and you've got 10 locations, you've all of a sudden got 1 million SKUs that, you know, there's some reports and things like that that may slow down because of that volume of data. But yeah, that's how you actually create SKUs. You can create them manually. You can hit new and create a SKU and type in all the information, but this is typically how it's done.
If you have an item that's lot tracked and you have a SKU in one location and you're using it to replenish a SKU in another location, will it return that lot tracking information?
Yeah, so the lot tracking is is one level lower. It's actually in the item ledger entries. So the stock keeping unit is sort of the high level thing that tells you how that item is going to be used. But the item track or the item ledger entries is actually where the lot number and everything is stored. So when you transfer that over, it's going to take that lot number into the new location and everything else. So the Skew doesn't really have a lot of bearing on the lot number itself. Sorry, one question.
One caution, if you're going to go through some eight SKUs, and believe me, I do, I've got over 700,000 SKU cards in my implementation. The caution is, we've got a lot of reports that we've created that are based on looking at the SKU card rollout activity. The minute you delete those SKUs, then information is gone.
And that's actually a very good point. So back to your question and that comment, most people go all or nothing, right? You don't have to. Like I could create, if there's only certain items I want to plan differently than what I plan off the item card, I could create 10 SKUs, and those are the only ones I want to plan differently in one location versus the other. But most people either go all or nothing, because then you either look at just the SKUs or you look just at the item cards. So you don't have to worry about looking at in both places for reporting and that sort of thing. I mean, ultimately, everything rolls up to the item card, like the item ledger entries and everything else. But a lot of people do reporting off SKUs. And there are tools out there that only run on SKUs.
I'm using item cards in bin locations. Is there any reason, and I've never used SKUs, is there any reason I would need to have SKUs if I'm using item bin?
Yeah, only if you have multiple locations. So as soon as you have more than one warehouse location, you likely want to use SKUs, because you'll want to replenish that item differently in each location. So one location you might have min-max set up because you want to have a standard stocking level. The other one, you only want to bring it in when you have demand.
And the item card is actually applied to everything.
Everything. Unless you have a stock keeping unit, it's going to use the item card. So you have a distribution center, you've got a max of 1,000, but your manufacturing location or your store only needs 10 at a time. Well, it's going to try and buy 1,000 if you don't have a SKU. Right. Okay, any other questions on that one at all? Wow, I'm going along here. Thought this would be quick. All right, so that's how we buy stuff. Now we're going to receive it, and it's really easy to receive stuff in NAV, right? This is actually, if you go on I actually moved it all somewhere else. But anyway, if you go to the Microsoft documentation, there's like a white paper that has some of these screenshots and flowcharts. So really, that's a flowchart out of Microsoft, and that's how they say you have to receive stuff. But really, depending on how you've got it set up, let's say you do have some of the warehouse capabilities set up, which is what this is talking about. You receive into a receiving bin, you might do some QC or something on it, or do something, and then you'll go and put that inventory away. Now, how many people do that? Or how many people just receive directly against the purchase order? Okay. So this is another process that you can look at where you actually have a two-stage receiving process where you receive everything into receiving, do stuff with it, or it just sits there until people get around to putting it away. And then that only really applies if you have bins turned on, because when you put it away, you indicate where you've actually put it. So when you have to go pick it, oh, they put item A in bin 2, right? And you can actually go find it. Okay. So that brings us to picking, and that's also really simple. But really, oops, what did I do here? Did it twice. So really, what NAV is going to do, or Business Central, it's going to give you a pick ticket. It's going to tell you which bin to go to, grab the stuff, and away you go. Now, if you're just using stock keeping units and you're not using bins, you're going to get a pick ticket that's going to give you that shelf number. Or sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, because the reports work differently. Most of the pick reports assume you have bins turned on at some level. But it's going to give you a shelf number, and you go to that bin that the shelf number indicates, and that item may or may not be there because it's just informational, right? Anyway, that's picking. We're not going to get into too much on the warehouse stuff, but we're going to talk about this a little bit.
So I've got a problem. I mentioned previously, when we pick, we got a warehouse that's like 14, 15 doors. When we pick a sales order, we have to pick to the ship bin.
Right.
You can't pick to a door. You can have like a quality check on that outbound truck to make sure you've got a pick sheet that applies to whatever that truck is before you put it on. Have you ever seen a setup or mod, or is there something I don't know that I could do differently in
Yes to everything. So the question is, when we do a pick, it says, take items to pick bin and place it in the destination bin. Destination bin, depending on how you've got your warehouse set up, is typically a single shipping bin. Like there's a default shipping bin that you pick everything, you take it over to shipping, you drop it off, and the shipper does his thing, right? But you can change that shipping bin. So on a per shipment basis, you can have 14 shipping bins set up, and you just choose the one you want them to drop it off. So that shipping bin relates to the specific bay that you want to pick to. So it does require a little bit of additional effort because you have to go, okay, truck 5 is going to be in bay 6 or whatever, so I'm going to set this pick to go to bay 6, and it'll actually tell them to take it to bay 6 or whatever it is. Yeah, and that's kind of built into NAV, right? And again, you have to have specific setup on all this. If you have any questions on some of this stuff, we can chat after. But what we're talking about is using a warehouse shipment, and right here, this bin code, that's your shipping bin. So you can see I've got 6 shipping bins set up. These are all doors that I can deliver that pick ticket
As long
to.
as we know what truck, where that load, so I've got 4 orders going on the load, as long as I take those 4 orders and apply that.
Exactly. Now the trick, and probably where that modification that somebody mentioned is you have to set this before you create the pick. So you may not know where that truck is coming to until you've actually created the pick. So if you have a modification, you could potentially change this and have it update the pick sort of after you've created the pick if you want, that sort of thing. Right? Yeah, there you go. So anyway, that's how you can select a different shipping or picking destination in the system. Okay, that's assuming you have warehouse shipments enabled within NAV. All right, now bin replenishment. So this diagram is actually a production diagram, not a movement diagram, but it's pretty close. So let's talk about stuff. So this is the other part of it where we're going to go through and talk about how we actually replenish stuff in the warehouse. Now, how many people have like bulk storage areas or overstock areas that they manage? Okay, enough to make it worth talking about. So the idea behind bin replenishment is, receive a bunch of pallets of stuff and I stick it over in the bulk storage area, and I've got pick bins, and now I want to replenish my pick bins because they're getting low. I don't want people running over and cutting apart pallets and everything like that. I want it more ordered. I want to keep my pick bins at a specific level based on what I have in my overstock. So that's what this does. So really, as it says here, NAV has a system that'll come in, it'll grab stuff out of bulk, move it into your pick bin. You can schedule that, you can run it daily. Instead of having guys run around and look for empty bins and then run over to overstock and see if they can find stuff and bring it over, you can really formalize that and make it a lot more efficient. Okay? All right, now in order to do this, by default, you need the directed put away and pick turned on, which kind of sucks sometimes because it adds a lot of overhead, and a lot of people don't need that overhead in order to get that type of capability. It's interesting why that's the case. They've explicitly in the code said that, if you don't have directed pick turned on, you can't use this. But if you just get rid of that check, it works just fine. And again, it goes back to how they used to license the system where you had to pay extra to get this. Now you don't. So if you're not using directed pick and you want to have this automated movement, it's like 5 minutes, and you can enable that by modifying the code. Now in Business Central Cloud, it gets a little trickier, but you can still do it. All right. Now the way it works, let's have a look at the bin replenishment stuff. And the way that works is if we go into bin contents again here, this min max that we set on here will indicate what we need to replenish. So we're below our min of 12, so it's going to try and move 40 in there. Now the way it does that is it looks at this bin ranking, and it's going to try and move product. So you indicate by bin ranking what's bulk and what's your picking location. And so what it's going to do is it's going to try and move that inventory. If it finds something that's in a lower ranked bin, it's going to bring it in and try and move it into this bin. And so the way we do that is we go into the movement worksheet. And again, if you want to make this work with other locations, so here I've got, again, normally it's just white, but or this is the advanced warehouse location, but you can set that up to work on other locations. And I've actually already done this. I could do it again. But you do calculate bin replenishment, and it runs through the system, and it finds all the things that are low, and it tells you what you can move into that particular bin. Okay, so here's that LS75, and it's telling us we can move 12 into that from our bulk storage bin. So that's really all it is. You go in there and you say, tell me what I should move around today, and you hit OK, and it'll run, and it'll bring a bunch of stuff in, and then when you're happy, you say create movement, and it's going to give you an instruction on what to move where. So, okay. Any questions on this?
So let's say you've got a pallet with 100 cases on it. Can you make it so at home, if you want to replen a pick area with bulk pick, will it replen the whole container to move? Or
No. So
break one pallet in?
yeah, so there's lots of options for that. If you're not using advanced warehousing, it won't know that you've got cases or boxes or pallets. It's just going to know you have eaches. If you're using advanced warehousing, it'll know, okay, I've got a pallet, and then there's a setting you can turn on called break bulk, and that will allow you to split that pallet into smaller units of measure to move around. Okay, so a little bit complicated, but it is possible. All right, I'm running late. And the most fun part is the inventory counts, because everybody loves inventory counts, right? So that first point is key. If you don't have accurate inventory, it's costing you a fortune, right? People are running around looking for stuff, they can't find it, you're shipping the wrong stuff, all that. Nothing else is important if you don't have accurate inventory. So to keep inventory accurate, lots of process options, but you have to do counts at some point, right? At some point you have to start doing counting. And barcoding is a good tool for using from a process side to sort of keep that inventory accurate longer term. So let's talk about cycle counts. Who does cycle counts here today? Everybody, call. You're all using the physical inventory journal or warehouse physical inventory journal to do that? All right. So I probably don't have to go through that in a lot of detail then. Yeah, well, let's actually have a look. Just for fun, for maybe some of you who don't. So again, if you're using advanced warehousing, there's something called the warehouse physical inventory journal that you would use instead. That advanced warehousing, like I said, turns on a bunch of stuff that you may or may not want or care or want, use. But the physical inventory journal, pretty simple. What you do is you come in and you, instead of calculate inventory, that's a full inventory count. It's going to go through and generate a list of items you need to count. We instead go to calculate counting period code. We bring this up, and it'll give us a list of all the items that are within our time frame to do that inventory count. Okay, so my work date is in 2020, so it's bringing up everything I need to count in 2020, all my slow-moving items, and if I scroll up, I can see my fast-moving and all that kind of stuff. Anything that I need to count within that time frame is going to show up in that list. Okay? Any questions? That's probably what you all do, and then everything you do, you just select the items you want to count, and you hit OK, and it brings them into your count sheet, right? All good? Everybody do that? Now, where does it get this date from? You guys know? Do we need to talk about that at all? How that's actually set up? Please? All right. So let's go in and look at how that's. Now, this is also done on the stock keeping unit level. So I lied earlier where I said stock keeping units are only for replenishment planning. They're also for the rest of the warehouse management side, where they can also control this type of information on the stock keeping unit. So inventory counts and a few other things for warehouse management. Now, the way this is set, this date range for cycle counts is set based on your physical inventory counting period code. And that's basically your ABC code. So you define your ABC code. There's no built-in tools in NAV. You need an add-on if you want to have it automatically calculate what your ABC criteria is. This one's flagged as slow. And slow, I count once a year. So you'll notice this time frame, it says sometime in 2020 I need to count this item. And when I do count it, what it'll do is it'll update the last count date and last physical inventory date here, and it'll push this out to the next year. Okay. On the other ones where I'm counting 12 times a year, once a month, what it'll do is when I count it in January, it'll move this date to February. And then I count it in February, it'll move it to March. So that's how it's calculating that, right? So if I actually go and change this to fast, it'll prompt me and say, hey, do you want to update your blah, blah, blah stuff? If I say yes, it now tells me that this is the time frame I need to count that item in.
So Mark, you said this only can be done to set up SKUs?
No, this can be done on a SKU or on the item card. Yeah, this is actually the item card here. But if I have different ABC codes by location, like physical inventory count period codes, then I can set those up per location. And then it tracks my count date per location as well.
So how do you set up your fast, slow, normal range?
You buy an add-on or you export to Excel and you figure it out. Yeah. There's no way in NAV to do that. Now, I think starting in 2015, it was somewhere around there, they actually added the ability to multi-select items and then go in and do this calculate counting period, which was always a big pain because the only way to update those dates, let's say I forgot to count something this month, and now it's February and I was supposed to count it in January, it'll never show up on my physical inventory journal again. Because I was supposed to count it in January, it's now February, it won't show up. And there was no way to deal with that previously. Now you can just multi-select all the items in your item list, hit calculate count period, and it'll bump it up to the current period. Yes.
So versus, instead of counting by item, so we do location-based counting. Is there a way to set scheduling up in that to count locations versus item?
The locations as in like bin locations?
Yeah, or even zone locations?
Yeah, no, not really. At all. So when you're doing that physical, you need an add-on, and there's a few out there. When you're doing that, what we're looking at is the item card, right? When you're bringing that physical inventory journal in, all the filtering and everything is done. Now, I lie again. On the cycle count stuff, you don't have any control. If you're doing a full physical count or if you're doing cycle counting without using that calculate counting period, you can filter by bin. So you can choose specific bins, but you can't schedule. It's all manual. Yeah, it's all manual. All right. Sorry, I'm running behind here because I talk too much. All right. Now, full inventory counts. How many people do full annual inventory? Okay. So you probably all know this already, but I'm going to say it anyway. So how many people do tag-based counting? I'm curious. Like use tags to count? Okay, good. Don't, because you don't need to. Anyway, you probably all know this already. This multi-user data entry, that's a challenge in standard NAV. It's hard to do. So how many people don't use bins here? A couple, okay. So you guys, and if you have the same item in multiple places, that's a challenge because you can count, two different people can count that item. You got to manually add that together and plug it in. That kind of sucks. But this organizing the sheets to allow multi-user data entry, that's really setting up different batches. So if you can set up, this person is counting these two aisles, so it's batch one. These two are counting these two aisles, it's batch two. That's ideal because then you can have multiple people entering that count when it comes back in. The challenge with that is if somebody finds a new item, and that's this define a process for found items, how do you deal with that? So if you're running the physical inventory journal today and somebody finds something that's not on that journal, what do you do?
Manually adjust it.
Yeah. It sucks, right? Anyway, so you need a process for that. Like, there's a few things you can do. You can calculate inventory on the physical inventory just for that item, try and bring it in. You can manually adjust it into the item journal. There's a few things you can do. Serial numbers and lot numbers suck, depending on how you got it set up. So if you have lot warehouse tracking or serial warehouse tracking, the worksheet isn't, or the physical inventory journal isn't too bad. But if I go out and I'm supposed to have 100 lot numbers in stock and I count 80, what does NAV want to know? Does it want to know which 80 I counted? It wants to know which 20 I didn't count. So you guys go out and figure out which 20 you didn't count and you type those in, right? That kind of sucks. So you need a process for being able to manage discrepancies in lot numbers and serial numbers. And then a recount process, right? So highlighters and post-it notes, and that's how you manage your recounts. So those are some of the issues you need to deal with on a full physical count. Ooh, we do have 45 minutes for this thing, right? Or is it an hour? Awesome. I'm on time. Okay, so let's have a quick look at using the physical inventory journal for for full count. All right, so with a full journal, we do the calculate inventory. We're generally going to restrict it to a single location. And here's where you can filter down the bins, right? As we talked about earlier, date filters, a few other things. And away we go. And this is also kind of new. There's actually a bug in one of the versions of NAV, can't remember which one, where if you didn't have any transactions, it wouldn't show up on the physical inventory journal at all, which sort of makes sense, but okay, anyway. And there's what I count. And that's basically it. And I print it out, so I print out the count sheet. Now again, you might want to do this by bin filter or whatever, so you have different batches to use, so you can have more appropriate or simplified data entry. But at this point, I would go in, I would actually print out that count sheet, hand it to somebody, they enter it, and away we go. Now when they come back and do that data entry, and you enter all the stuff, how do you know where your discrepancies are? Other than a custom report or something like that. Okay, so the only tool we have here to check our discrepancies is if we go in and we run that test report. Oh, and you don't want to see this test report. So this is not standard NAV test report, sorry. But the basics are the same. So it'll come in and you run that test report and the base one won't quite look like this, but it's similar enough that you get the general idea. And it's going to give you your final discrepancy. That's what's actually going to get posted into the GL. Okay? And it's not a great report. Some people just export this to Excel because we can look at the discrepancies here, right? So the amount here, that's going to be what the adjustment is. So people export it to Excel, they sort it by that amount, and they use that to generate their recount sheets. So, yes?
We use the warehouse physical inventory journal. What's the difference between the physical journal and the warehouse?
The warehouse physical inventory journal is enabled when you enable directed pick and put, or directed put away and pick. So basically, if you have advanced warehousing turned on, you'll see the warehouse physical inventory journal instead. And then it becomes a two-step process. And it sucks because the stuff we just talked about on the next count period and the last inventory count date, none of that works anymore, right? Like it doesn't actually set the last count date. When I post this, who knows what happens when I post this thing? Everybody knows, I know, but physical. Yeah, on the warehouse, it's a two-step because you enter all the warehouse stuff. I actually don't want to delete all this because it'll take forever. But if I post this, let's just post this, this bike here. If I post this, we get a couple of things that happen. So first of all, it's going to adjust 34 into stock, right? But what happens if I post this one here? So there's no discrepancy whatsoever, right? No discrepancy. This quantity is my discrepancy. What happens if I post that? I'm going to get an item ledger entry for that. So, oops. Oh, by the way, I shouldn't say don't because, oops, missed the field. The reason it's yelling at me is, anybody know why it yelled at me and told me I had the wrong document number? Dumb stuff, right? It's because I have this number series set. I dislike that. Posting number series is better if you're doing partial posting, right? Because then it doesn't increment the number series and tell me everything that I haven't posted yet is the wrong number. If you use a posting number series, you can partially post these journals. Okay, so what happens when I use the number series, what it did was it generated everything with this particular number here, and if I partially post this, I can no longer post with that number. I have to use the next number in the series. And if I use this number, it's actually going to screw up next time I generate the journals, but that's okay, we don't care. So if you use the posting number series, it doesn't generate this document number like that, and I can partially post this journal as I'm going through, which might be handy, because you might want to, I'm sure about these 100 items, I'm going to post them, get them off the worksheet, and keep working on the rest. Don't use a number series, use a posting number series. Okay. All right, now let's go back to this guy here, and I'm going to post him. And The question was, oh, I forgot what item I posted, but that's okay. Do I get an item ledger entry for that? Yeah, it went off there, but if I come in there, what was that number? Was it 1251? I don't know. Anyway, I won't get an item ledger entry because the quantity was 0. NAV is not going to post an item ledger entry if I have no quantity to adjust. Well, how do I know I counted that thing? Well, the item card will tell me the last count date. Any idea where it gets that from? Okay. What we do is we go into somewhere in here. La, 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 la. Ah, I hate where they hide that. Can't see anything. And it's different on the list than it is on the item card. Let me just go into the item card and I'll find it there instead. So what we get is, under Navigate, should be under Navigate. The one thing about the new Business Central, by the way, is if you type in, if you're on Business Central Cloud and you go and type in and you know where you're looking for on a page, it'll give you a link to the menu item that you're looking for. We've got physical inventory ledger entries. And this, I'm just going to clear the filters, and this will actually tell us what we've actually counted. So here, let's filter to the blue location, and I can't remember which item number it was, and I don't know the posting date, but let's go filter on the entry numbers. Anyway, what it'll do is it'll come in, and even if it's a 0 quantity, it will log that here. Okay? So even if I have a 0 discrepancy, the physical inventory ledger entries will tell me what I've counted. If you have auditors, or if you need to audit your count, this is what you look at. Because it'll also track things you've counted that didn't have discrepancies, that don't have item ledger entries associated with them. Okay? And that, by the way, is also where it gets this last physical inventory date from. Okay? That's where this is coming from. It's a flow field that looks up to that physical inventory ledger entries. If you're using the warehouse physical inventory journal, you don't get that stuff. You don't get physical inventory ledger entries. You don't get this. That's why it sucks. Okay? All right, any questions about that? Good. All right, so barcoding, keeping inventory accurate, very important, right? Counts suck. So the fewer discrepancies you have, like you don't want to explain to the finance guys why you're out by $1 million at the end of the year every year. So using barcoding is going to keep your inventory more accurate. You all have barcoding built into your system already. This is what it looks like. Okay, so if you want to use the base NAV stuff, you can go in, you can turn this on. You do need the advanced warehousing turned on, but you'll notice you can do picking, you can do putaways, you can do movements, and you can do physical inventory from a handheld device. You guys all own this. You have to basically enable it. If you've done it before, it takes 10 minutes, and you can start using this thing. Okay, it's in NAV 2013 and up, it's included for free. Business Central, it's going away eventually, soon. And NAV 2009 and older, you need to buy it.
Just to be clear, the system takes 10 minutes. Everything else.
Yeah, exactly. The IT portion of it takes 10 minutes to set this up and get it running. Yes, sir.
You talked about adding items to the physical inventory journal. Is that a LANM add-on that we have? Can you not do that?
You cannot. You cannot by default. And again, I kind of see the philosophy around it, but you can disable that if you want. So you're allowed to add it in. But yeah, by default, you can't add to the physical inventory journal.
Are you saying this is central barcoding going away?
This is called ADCS, and it's part of NAV. It has been since forever. But yes, it's being deprecated in the next version of Business Central. All right. So. No, it just means Microsoft isn't supplying a barcoding solution with new versions of Business Central.
So you have to go to an add-on.
Yeah, and to be honest, you know, this is there, it works. Very few people use it like this out of the box, just because it's somewhat limited. But even if you just use it for physical inventory, it might make it worth setting up. Right? But again, you need directed pick. You need the advanced warehousing turned on to do this. But even just for inventory counts, if you happen to have barcodes on your product from your vendors anyway, setting this up and using it to scan. And it doesn't, you don't have to use one of these devices. You can use a laptop or a tablet and run this on a laptop or a tablet and scan in or whatever you like. Right.
So what would be a good add-on provider?
There's like half a dozen out in the expo. Go check them out. There's at least 4, maybe more out there that have barcoding add-ons.
Don't look too far.
No, yeah, best bet check out there. Just ask around, yeah. Ask around. Sorry. All right. So no, we're not doing barcoding demos. Hey, look at that, right on time. So yeah, if you have questions about barcoding, go into the expo, ask people, all that kind of stuff, and you should be good. All right. Thanks for attending. Please fill out your surveys. Thanks, everyone. If you have any questions, have fun.
Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel.